Hi, YouTube. Thanks for joining us today on A Life of Compounding Interest. I'm doing something a little out of character, not only for the channel, but for me. I don't tend to jump into the news cycles. I don't like talking politics, and I generally am going to stay away from religion. But that being said, the Pope just released an encyclical, and it kind of has the tech world and some other pieces of the political sphere looking, because this encyclical is really pointed at AI and how humans fit into this picture. And it talks quite a bit about the existential hard place that we found ourselves in when it comes to AI. Now, I started reading this just because, hey, this is an historical thing and very applicable to everyday life at this point in time. And starting to read it, a couple of things immediately jumped out at me. The first is just the fact that the Pope acknowledges that many people believe that the church should more or less stay in their lane, stick to church things, and let all the rest of the worldly things more or less happen around them. Clearly, that is not this Pope's style. He believes that he needs to interject in some of these matters. Cool. But reading on a little more just into the very first parts, he calls out one story in particular. And I honestly can't tell you why it pricked my ears as much as it did, but it led me to pause and go look into this a little bit more. That story was the Tower of Babel. And I think a lot of people can easily see how that story could be applicable to some of the things that we're experiencing today, but I didn't realize really the depth of this and how it was so applicable. Now, when I paused reading the Pope's work and just opened up Genesis chapter 11, the first thing that struck me is how short this story actually is. It's only like 9 verses or so on Genesis chapter 11. And it pretty much, yeah, I could definitely read it the way that I think most people interpret the story. And I can tell you, I interpreted it the way that I probably would have read it in a children's book. These people got together, they tried to build a tower to heaven, and God changes all of their languages around so they're confused and they can't continue work on it, and they just stopped. Moral of the story feels something like, don't build a tower to heaven. God doesn't want you to reach it. But when I actually opened the text and read it, it has a little more detail than that, and surprisingly, not too much more. Now, I'll paraphrase the story and highlight these things that stand out. So it starts off, the people, they all speak the same language. The text makes that very clear that everyone's speaking the same language, and they wander out onto this plain and they decide to build a city. And as part of that city, they want to build a tower that reaches to heaven. And it goes into their motivation to do this. For starters, they want to make a name for themselves. And then it goes on to say they don't want to be scattered. Seems like good enough reason. Then it goes into how they bake the bricks and mix the mortar. And as they're building this, God comes down and walks amongst the people and says, wow, look at what these humans are doing. When they get together, if they can accomplish this, they could probably accomplish anything. And then a quick fast forward to God confuses everyone's language. They stop building and they're scattered. I find a bit of that humorous, but Some of the pieces there that stood out to me make this story what it is and so applicable to what we're experiencing right now. The first is everybody is speaking the same language. Everybody is on the same page. I use that term all the time. If we are speaking the same language, then you understand what I'm saying. We're both working towards the same goal. We're not trying to convince each other of anything. That's how I've used that phrase a lot. And so when they wander out on here, it very much highlights that they wanted to build all of this to make a name for themselves, to leave an imprint on human history. They didn't want to be forgotten, and they didn't want to be scattered. They wanted to unify and stay together. So they started building. It highlights how they bake the bricks, and it talks about the type of mortar that they are making. It talks about them like it is a specific technology. Now, this story, I'm not a historian or a theologian or anything like that, so feel free to correct me in the comments if I'm just way off base. But this story takes place shortly after the Noah story. You know, Earth is flooded and they're trying to repopulate. Would make sense that they all speak the same language if they're only a couple generations deep. But maybe this was technology. Maybe the way that they were making the bricks and mortar was technology. Because here's something that the story doesn't say. To undertake a project this big, it takes a lot of people. Not only does it take people to do the labor and actually build this city and build this giant tower, but it takes engineers to come up with the technology. It takes the architects to design these things, the project managers to make sure that things are happening on task. It takes a PR team to convince everyone to put forth the time, the effort, and the resources into making this thing happen. It's a lot of work. Now, the next part of the story, this is where, I consider myself a Christian, but if too many people dug too deep, they may question that. And I'm definitely not Catholic, so take this as you will. But here's where I would get in trouble. Let's just take the entire section of this that said God came down, walks amongst the people, got a little scared of what they could do, and confused everyone. Let's just take that out for a minute. Let's say the people saw this. Look at what we can do if we all work together. We can build this magnificent tower. We can do all of these great technological feats. What if we were the ones saying that? And then comes the part of everyone's language gets confused. That's how the translation goes that I read. Everyone's language became confused. Again, I've always used this term about we understand each other. What if they just stopped understanding each other? What if the reasons that they were building this tower were no longer shared? What if the people that were doing the labor didn't see what they were working so hard for? What if the citizens of this tribe or city started to feel the effects of all these resources going to build this tower and question if it was really worth the hardship? What if the architects and the PR team and the engineers all got just a little too zealous in their creations and lost touch with the rest of the project? What if everyone just started working in different directions so they could no longer continue to build this thing together? That seems very plausible on a project of that scale. And so naturally, if everyone is fighting and taking different camps and different sides, and some people are being exploited while some are being exalted, people would scatter. One group would go one way, another would go another way, and they would go and try to build their own cities, their own towers, in the way that they saw fit. And that would benefit them and everyone else. So, what if that is the confusing of the language? Because that feels a lot like what we are going through right now. I don't think anybody disagrees that the tower or AI is amazing technology. And everything that we're doing in that is a big deal. But I think there's a lot of people that have differing opinions on what it's for, how it will be used for or against us. And I also think that there's a lot of people wondering if the sacrifices are worth it. Because after all, it's being used as an excuse for unemployment rates, for building data centers and consuming huge amounts of resources. I don't think anybody can deny that we've hitched our entire financial economy to this AI race. What if everybody just stops agreeing that we're heading in the same direction? It seems a lot like the Tower of Babel and a lot of what the Pope started off talking about in this encyclical. I found it really interesting. I would encourage others to just go and read it. Again, it's not a religious pitch or anything else. As far as I'm concerned, these are really good stories with lessons in there if you choose to explore them. But yeah, if you agree or disagree, leave a comment below. I would love to have this conversation and expand it a little bit more. If you like what you heard and you want to hear what we normally do on this channel, which is not up-to-date news at this point in time, subscribe, like, and check out our website, lifeofcompoundinginterest.com. But yeah, this is very interesting times that we're living in, and I think that they do require a reflective lens, and I appreciate what this Pope is trying to do in making people think about what we're doing and where we're going and how this technology can affect each of us individually, spiritually, holistically. I think that it's one of the more refreshing things that I've seen in popular news recently. Anyway, until next time, I really do hope you take care. Thanks for joining.